There is something unescapable on the internet this year. And no, it is not bootlegged versions of Taylor Swift's The Eras Tour. I'm talking about European summer. Whether it's TikToks, news articles, or your favorite TV show that happens to be set in Italy, European summer is all the craze this year. I'm Elizabeth. I like to make lifestyle content and whatever my latest hyperfixation is. And lately I've been hyperfixating on TikToks of European summer. I already went to Europe this summer. I don't need to see any more. But at the same time, I have all the FOMO because I went in May before it was apparently before European summer kicked off. I'm confused, but I'm gonna drink my coffee and hyperfixate some more.
Dreaming of a trip to Europe? Yes, I am. You are not alone.
Things no one tells you about European summer. Hotels get booked up 6 months in advance.
We took a chance, like we were dancing out.
This is what you should pack for your trip to Europe.
The whole night was like a dream. Season 2's explosive finale on HBO.
Enjoy the Ionian Sea while you still can.
And now, White Lotus fever has transitioned to widespread wanderlust.
We have to make up for the lost time, said Elizabeth Hughes, who made a scrapbook of places she wanted to visit in Europe during the height of the pandemic. She is currently in London, starting a 4-week itinerary in 8 countries, including France, Italy, and Greece. I had to sell my car to pull this off, but if I'm traveling this far, I'm going to see everywhere. European summer has a deep history within the European continent and the American zeitgeist. Young people have been traveling throughout Europe for hundreds of years. In fact, it used to be called the Grand Tour, and I always thought it was an American thing. Like, I thought it was a thing Americans did to go discover Europe in their college years. But it turns out the Grand Tour predates the American experience. It goes back to even the 1400s. There is references to rich people sending their kids around Europe to explore, to experience the culture, the art, the history of the European continent, and it even had a itinerary. And it's kind of interesting because itineraries and European summer tend to go hand in hand. You see TikToks, this is the cities I went to, this is the rail system I traveled, this is the company I went with, these are the spots I saw, and the itinerary of the Grand Tour was very built into the Grand Tour itself. There are guidebooks on how to do the Grand Tour, the 8 cities, the 12 locations that every young man who went on the Grand Tour must see, the art he had to visit, the cities he had to know, the people he had to talk to. The Grand Tour not only had an itinerary, there were guidebooks sold, and that translated to the American culture. We have Mark Twain, who actually wrote a whole book on the Grand Tour, and I've never really been a Mark Twain fan, but if you'd asked me what I thought his best-selling novel would be, I would say probably the book that sold the most in Mark Twain's life would be like Huckleberry Finn or something like that. But in fact, it was his book about his own Grand Tour of Europe. Immediately following the American Civil War, Mark Twain undertook a decidedly modest yet greatly aspiring Grand Tour of Europe, the Middle East, and the Holy Land, which he chronicled in his highly popular satire Innocents Abroad in the year 1867. Not only was it the best-selling of Twain's work during his lifetime, it became one of the best-selling travel books of all time. Wealthy Americans have always traveled Europe, it seems, to find themselves, to get to know the culture, and to have that coming-of-age experience outside of their own education and into their young adulthood before they settled down and became established adults in their own communities. The Grand Tour, having this legacy in wealthy American lives, has translated into a nostalgia for European summer. Now, European summer, I think, has a mythology that exists outside of the American Grand Tour. It has this mythology set in our culture, in our media, whether it's an Emily in Paris, or Mamma Mia, or the ever-popular White Lotus, which has cemented Sicily as the location for 2023. Media and the idea, the myth of vacationing in Europe permeates our cultural fun when we think of summer. And just think about it, all the Disney movies that send the kids to Europe for the summer, whether that's the Cheetah Girls heading to Barcelona or the Twin Trap. The Parent Trap, where one of the twins heads to London for the first time, or The Princess Diaries, the sequel, where she goes to Genovia for the first time. All of these stories that romanticize Europe in a way as a place to discover yourself, to find your roots, to find your voice, to redefine your friendships. That is what Europe has represented to a generation of kids and teens who grew up watching these stories, where they went away to Europe and discovered more about themselves and lived a better life because they were in Europe. And not only does Europe have this nostalgia, the fanciful nature, the fun times, but for working Americans, Europe represents a quality of life that many of us aspire to. It's no secret that the countries that tend to rank the happiest in the world don't tend to be the United States.
If you're gonna be sad, you might as well be sad in Paris.
It's actually Costa Rica and Denmark, but we don't tend to talk about Costa Rica as our European summer. But Denmark definitely fits in the European summer narrative. But the reason Europeans may be happier than the average American when it comes to their work is the required R&R is Europeans do not work outside of their working hours, and they have more set vacation resting hours. And I think for many Americans, the idea of going away to Europe and not thinking about work for the summer is completely not something most of us grew up experiencing, and something we've idolized as adults. If you think about Emily in Paris and Emily's reaction to her French coworkers not working on the weekends, it's a little naive, but also many of us want that experience. We want to be able to turn off our phones, to turn off our work email, and to not think about work at all. And Emily in Paris, silly example, but for us, but for the overworked, exhausted, fed up with medical bills Americans, Europe is this magical place. The mythology of an easier life in Europe, where your healthcare is paid for, where you're not ladled with debt from the moment you were born to cover your basic life expenses, from college to healthcare to getting a job with paid time off, with plenty of paid time off and required holidays. That mythology permeates into our idea of where to vacation, because if living there is easier, there's this inner thinking that vacationing there will bring you that sense of repose and happiness that living in Europe, which you may not be able to do, but at least you can vacation there and get that experience instead. At least that's my opinion. And I'm rarely wrong, in my opinion. So what are we seeing right now? European summer has a very long history, but this year, if you think it's everywhere, you are not wrong. Europe is oversaturated with tourists, especially American tourists. According to the data that we're seeing, more Americans are traveling to Europe than ever before. According to Hopper, since April of this year, demand to Europe has outpaced 2019 demand by as much as 20%. And 2019 was a record year for American travel to Europe. And we have the consequences of this record travel, which is annoying travelers who want a nice peaceful vacation, but it's just not gonna happen this year. Prices are skyrocketing. European hotels are averaging over $200 per night. That's 37% more than last year. Prices in some top cities have even risen more compared to last year. That includes Rome, where prices are 63% higher, and Madrid, which is 41% higher. And price and hotel prices are not the only thing. Airfare to Europe this summer is averaging over $1,200 per ticket. That's the highest ticket price we've seen in 6 years. And it's not just airfare. Even gelato in Italy has gone up 20%. You can't go to Italy without some gelato, so feel bad for the tourists in Italy. These skyrocketing prices are not the only problem. Europe is not built to handle this level of tourism, and it is almost ready to buckle under the weight of this many tourists.
Every single influencer and TikToker who put the Amalfi Coast on my For You page over the last 2 months deserves jail time, because while they showed you the gorgeous coastlines and the cute little towns, what they didn't tell you were the disclaimers. First of all, it's impossible to get here. You have to fly into Naples, then you have to take a train from Naples to Sorrento, then you have to stand in 90-degree weather waiting for a ferry to get on a ferry with all of your luggage. Mind you, we've been in Europe for 2 weeks. All of your luggage, lug it onto the ferry, get to Amalfi Coast, finally. Then, to get to the highest of the high points, the beautiful hotels with the gorgeous, there's no streets here. There's no cars driving. So you have to walk up 160 stairs with all of your luggage to get to the top of this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous area with these beautiful views, carry it, and then also all the power went out because the Amalfi Coast doesn't have the infrastructure to support this tourism. Oh my God.
Let's just think about some of these problems. Number one, these cities are old. Their infrastructure is not built for this level of crowds. This is a quote from the New York Times. The Croatian city, its white ramparts are best known as the King's Landing in HBO's Game of Thrones, is a destination that is grappling with the issue of over-tourism. In the first 5 months of 2023, it saw a 46% increase in tourists compared to the same time last year. It recently surpassed Venice as the most over-touristed city in Europe. Marija Grazio is a 58-year-old pianist and occasional tour guide. She said it is impossible to create a normal, organized life, recalling a time 2 years ago when her mother fell sick and the emergency services were unable to get to her apartment. It's as if you were in the jungle. You wonder if you will stay alive. Imagine 8,000 tourists. What if something happens? Dubrovnik needs to be looked at like a stadium hosting a major event. There are only 2 emergency exits. She also complained about the noise, saying that she had invested in triple-paneled wooden windows and shutters in the last 2 years to help keep out the racket. I live like a hamster. I can't sleep with the window open at night. If that doesn't give you a clue about how miserable this over-tourism is doing for the locals, then I don't know what else would. And then another interesting thing is the short-term rental problems. So I saw this incredible report from AP News, and the numbers were staggering to me. So think of Venice. Venice is one of the top touristed cities in Europe. The city counts 49,000 residents. 49,000 people live in Venice. It has 49,000 tourist beds. Nearly half of those are apartments available for short-term rental. A short-term rental should be its own entire video, but there are major issues with short-term rentals in these historic cities. The city of Florence is now trying to address it. It's limiting the number of short-term rentals in the city center to 8,000, which is still quite a lot in the historic part of the city. But other European cities are lagging behind. They don't have the means necessary to stop short-term rentals because it is propping up their economy, but at the same time it is contributing to over-tourism and their infrastructure cannot handle it. And the problem with the infrastructure becoming increasingly overburdened is not only does that harm the locals, but as more Americans flock to Europe, they become increasingly disenchanted with the infrastructure problems. And Americans don't like European infrastructure. Let's just say it. We don't like to walk. We'd rather drive a car. And these cities are not built for American infrastructure and the expectations of Americans. So you're going to see stupid TikToks complaining about European infrastructure that is built for Europeans because American tourists don't know how to deal with European infrastructure. Along with over-tourism comes digital nomads, because digital nomads, they want to work in these places because they want to experience them and to live longer term. And we're seeing the effects in countries like Portugal. So Portugal has a visa program that if you made at one point $2,500 a month, you could apply for a visa to live in Portugal. And the problem with that is that locals in Portugal made on average less than $1,000 a month. I should say 1,000 euros. It was 1,000 euros a month. Locals in Portugal made half of what digital nomads were making, but so many digital nomads flocked to Portugal to live there. It became a top destination for digital nomads that it started to outprice the locals, and you had issues. The cost of housing shot up 157% in Portugal between 2020 and this year. And locals are still struggling to have housing. They're still struggling to have housing. And along with short-term rentals and digital nomads, it's a problem for locals. The over-tourism and these economies are not built for this level of tourism, and the locals themselves are having to move out of these cities that make the cities what they are in order to feed into the economy that is being eroded by over-tourism. Looking at the numbers, more than 82 million households in the EU have difficulty paying their rent, 17% of people live in overcrowded accommodations, and just over 10% spend more than 40% of their income on rent. Hit hardest by unequal access to decent, affordable housing are young people, families with children, the elderly, and those with disability and migrants. In Portugal, the problem is magnified by tourism, whose robust growth before the pandemic has come roaring back. After attracting a record 25 million tourists in 2019, Portugal grew 15.3 million last year, a 158% increase. The government of Portugal is trying to take steps to halt the skyrocketing housing prices for locals, which includes capping increases in rental contracts, forcing the owners of unoccupied properties to rent them out, or granting priority to renters under the age of 25, and halting new licenses except in rural areas for short-term vacation rentals. Short-term vacation rentals are a thorn in the side for economic growth in these countries because the people who are coming in do not invest in the local economy long-term. They spend tourism dollars and then they leave. And the locals are left to try to actually eke out a sustainable year-long life, which is really difficult with short-term rentals taking over these European cities, especially in a country like Portugal, which already was struggling with economic growth, and then over-tourism magnified the whole issue even more. Anyway, I could read about this all day long. Even as I am talking, I'm filling in. I wrote part of the script for this video and I was like, oh dang, I meant to look this up. I'm really bad at writing scripts for videos because number one, my Ritalin is out of stock because of the DEA. So thanks to the DEA for making me struggle so much. Anyway, so yeah, European summer is not very European summer for a lot of Europeans. They are struggling to deal with skyrocketing prices, to deal with housing, and to deal with the overcrowding in their own backyards, while Americans want to go to Europe and have this fanciful little time, this perfect little vacation, and it is not going to happen. You are not going to have a good vacation if you are envisioning, Mamma Mia, here we go again for your summer. In fact, I think Paris syndrome is happening to a lot of Americans in Europe.
Y'all save all y'all money, all y'all lives to come here. Let me be the one to break your bubble. First of all, Paris stink. It smelled like piss, cheese, and armpits. Child, eating the damn pigeons was crazy. And ain't nothing to do but eat at cafes. You will see a cafe on every corner because there's no activities here and the food is so mid. That's why there's hella fast food, American fast food chains, because their food don't taste like shit. And that shit look grimy as hell. Paris look grimy as hell and dungeon. Post-apocalyptic. Everywhere you go, it was graffiti. The buildings weren't inviting. They weren't welcoming. It was actually a horror sight to see. Like, this was shocking to me. They will never show you that this is what Paris really looks like. In the Eiffel Tower, child, this was the trail to the Eiffel damn Tower. This was the most hype shit I've ever seen. Outside of this tower, it ain't shit to do. There's no mime culture. They don't know how to capitalize off their culture. It's just this damn tower.
Now, Paris syndrome is this idea that people have a huge romantic vision of Europe, of Paris, and then they show up in Paris and they're so disappointed they end up having depression. And there is this TikToker who has been bullied all over TikTok and Twitter because he is roasting European cities, and I will say he does have some weird undertones. He compared Paris to the Middle East, but I'm not even sure if he's been to the Middle East to compare it to the Middle East. But also, why are we deciding that any place that you think is not aesthetic for TikTok is the Middle East? Like, that seems to have a little bit of racial undertones to me. I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying it's kind of throwing the Middle East under the bus for no reason at all. But he is being heavily critiqued on the internet for his general dislike of European cities. The ultra-romanticization of Europe will lead to disappointment because we tend to forget that these are places that people actually live. They're not just the set for your main character moment in Europe. When you're headed to Europe, you're headed to a real place. I saw an interesting comparison. Someone said that they didn't mind the crowds in Rome because they had been to Disney World in the summer. And I wanted to ask them, you do realize people live here. They don't live at Disney World. So the crowding for the locals is a lot bigger of an issue because this is them going back and forth to their daily life. And they don't exist to make your stay magical as Disney World does. You could argue that people are treating Europe like Disney World and they need to get out of that mindset, because Europe is not a genie in a bottle. You can get whatever you want out of it. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting comparison to someone saying, well, I've been to Disney World, so this doesn't bother me. Because you can't treat Rome like Disney World. If you wanted that, just go to Epcot. I think it's cheap. The flights are cheaper. Not only is the romanticization of Europe toxic for locals, it tends to highlight our class disparities. To have the White Lotus experience in Sicily, you need to have White Lotus levels of money. And a lot of influencers who I see promoted on my feed as having the best vacations, the best times in Europe, are extremely wealthy. And European summer, I'm glad that it has become more accessible to a lot of Americans, but keep in mind, to have that experience that you've seen Alex Earl or another big influencer promote, you're going to have more money than I do. I went to the UK for 2 weeks. I spent, I don't remember my entire budget, but I think I spent less than $3,500, maybe close to $4,000. I had a good time, but I didn't have the like influencer time of my life. I was eating $5 sandwiches from the grocery store and, you know, snacks from a gas station or the train station, whatever you want to call it, because in order to have the good experiences, I had to save in other ways. I had to stay at less expensive, less aesthetic Airbnbs in order to stretch my budget. If I wanted to have the European summer experience, I will never have that, because I will probably never have that level of wealth in order to be able to afford to have a luxury vacation to Europe. If I had that level of wealth, I would have other problems. Anyway, I just think we should highlight the fact that a lot of the romanticizing of Europe that we see is from a lot wealthier people than you and I, and you can't expect to have that glamorous of a vacation on a working class budget. And even the idea of being able to go to Europe is perhaps not even working class. Perhaps it is an upper class idea that Americans are taking out credit and not paying their bills in other areas in order to afford to go. And I think we should be more financially honest about, like, what are we cutting in our, like, expense-wise, what are we splurging on or not splurging on in order to afford what is, for many, a vacation that is far too costly. Before I end this video, I do want to plug an easy way to travel. If you want to see the world and you're not stuck on going to Europe for the summer, I have a great source for you to hack all your trips, and that is EF Ultimate Break. They're the reason I went to Ireland, and they have a bunch of trips on sale right now through the end of July. And you can really get some good deals. You can plan out a trip months in advance, and you can change your trip date up to 60 days before. For example, I bought my trip for Ireland for May, and then in March I realized, hey, May isn't gonna work, so I actually switched it to September, and that worked out perfectly. Didn't have to pay any fees, anything like that. And that is a really affordable way for me to travel, because yeah, I don't have the kind of money where I can just be like, hey, I'm going to Europe, and 2 days later I'm in Europe. Instead, I like to plan out a long time in advance and say, hey, next summer I want to go on a trip for 10 days, and I will put $150 down a month to pay for it, because that's affordable to me. I can just, you know, not pay for 6 different streaming services and instead pay for a trip in the future. I just want to point out a couple of my dream trips that I'm thinking of booking through EF for next year. One is either Japan. This goes to a lot of different locations in Japan, and I really like the itinerary. The second dream trip would be South Africa. For some reason, I've never been to Africa, and I really think South Africa would be really cool, and I'm thinking maybe the fall of 2024. And just a couple big trips that I'm interested in. They are a little expensive, but if you pay for them over time and you book them during their sales, you can get a great deal. So I'm just gonna include this as part of my video, as you don't have to be rich and famous to travel to Europe. You can be an extraordinary person like me and just look ahead and use a great travel company that covers your flights, accommodations, and all your tours for one price. Extra $100 off. Check out their website below. It's gonna be linked below, so you can look at all the trips, all the prices, everywhere in the world they have to offer, and look into doing it if you want to travel and see more of the world. European summer is about over because it is mid-July, but the content from European summer will last a lifetime, and it will probably cycle about this time next year. We'll see another outpouring of social influencers headed to Europe for the summer. but I think European summer is a state of mind. It's a state of exploration of the romanticization of your everyday life and the simple pleasures of slowing down and enjoying the company and good food and good culture of those around you, which can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in Europe. It can be, as I am, living in Florida. It could be another country that is not Europe, that is perhaps where the price of flights have not gone up 6 times higher than they were a year ago, and where the hotels have not skyrocketed in price, and where it's not over touristed. So yeah, European summer, I'm gonna claim it's a state of mind, and I'm gonna enjoy it. It's not gonna be just a summer thing, it's gonna be all year. So I hope you enjoyed this little video. I just wanted to chat about European summer and how much I keep seeing it all over my social media, and the pros, the cons. Were there any pros? Were there cons? Let me know what you think. And if you want to find me all over the internet, I'm that Liz Hunter everywhere, and I can't guarantee anything but chaos. So if you want to check out my Patreon, I do try to share my videos earlier over there and even pitch ideas and topics for future conversations on YouTube. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. And thanks for subscribing, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. See ya.
We're sorry. You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.